Hello everyone, welcome to the Jacksonville History Show. I'm Harry Reagan. Tonight, another in our series of oral history interviews with Jacksonville broadcasters. This time, Howard Kelley. Here's my conversation with Howard. So let's talk a little bit about radio, first of all, because that was a stepping stone for you to get into TV. Where was your first radio job and what were you doing?
Well, my first radio job was at WPDQ as a disc jockey, even though today my kids can't admit or won't admit that their father was once a disc jockey, but that's what put me through college and kept me going in summers and weekends. So I started at WPDQ, which was a top 40 radio station, but with a news department, an active news department, so I was able to do both double duty.
And big hit songs that you would have played would have been what comes to mind?
We weren't even into the disco era at that point, so we're talking about a lot of Bill Haley and the Comets kind of music when you really get down to it. Rock and roll, the first stages of rock and roll, and then as it moved along, and we began to see radio stations in the community start to segment themselves with their own personalities built around various music styles.
But PDQ and the Big Ape were...
Big Ape came along a bit later, but at the time I was in it, Big Ape made a huge impact here. They were at 690 with a transmitter out in the salt marshes of Orange Park with a 50,000 watt AM radio station that could be heard as a local station all the way up into the Carolinas and down to the south. Of course, in the evenings that wasn't the case because they had 6 towers to transmit out of over in West Jacksonville or out in Baldwin. And because of the way things were configured with those towers, they had a signal that was so narrow that you could actually drive across the beam of it at night as you went through downtown and not be able to hear it in North Jacksonville and not be able to hear it in South Side either. So.
Did you always want to be in broadcasting?
I think so. You know, when I think about my first impressions of radio, I go back to when I was elementary school and before, and I can remember Sunday mornings getting up and as we got ready for church, listening to Junior Duck read the Sunday comics on WJAX, which was a city-owned radio station. Interesting story with that radio station. Like so many communities around the United States at that time, private investment was not available for broadcasting, for radio, not readily at least. And many communities felt the only way they were going to have any kind of a radio presence was for the city or the town to actually get a license and develop a department around it and be the broadcasters of the community. Jacksonville was that way. We licensed WJAX, and that radio station wound up based in the Signal Bureau. The Signal Bureau being the department that took care of your street lights and red lights and also handled the fire department dispatching.
But they didn't know exactly where to put it.
Didn't know where to put it. It didn't fit. Yeah. And in Jacksonville's case, there were several engineers there that did double duty. One minute they're taking care of the fire alarm that had just been pulled downtown. The next minute they were making an announcement as to the next song of Guy Lombardo they were about to play. One of those was a very interesting broadcaster and engineer, signal engineer, by the name of Tommy Tucker, who is probably one of the great legends of radio here. And on Sunday mornings, he would pretend that he was Junior Duck, and he would read to the children of the community the Sunday morning comics.
So WJAX, so it was the first public broadcasting, those kinds of stations.
Yes, but it was commercial. It was still a commercial station, and it didn't start with a lot of commercials, but eventually they began selling commercials.
And made some money, I guess, for the city.
Made good money for the city for a long time, and of course as more commercial stations came into the market, the pressure was on the city to stop competing with private enterprise. But even people like Virginia Adder, the legendary Virginia Adder, worked for WJAX for a number of years.
And we'll get back to Virginia Adder later because your careers intersected.
Yes, they did.
A little later. And so you were growing up in Jacksonville. You were born here.
Born here, native.
And went to school.
I'm a North Side boy, so I went through the North Shore, Kirby Smith, Andrew Jackson process. And during that time, I really became enamored with radio, and particularly radio. And as I got to high school, however, television took on a new gleam in my eye because a new television station had just gone on the air. Channel 4 had been on the air, had made the transition from being a radio station and then added a television transmitter and became the first television station in the market. But then Channel 12 came on the air in 1957, and I was a sophomore in high school. And I was fascinated with television and this new television station. And I think at that time, that was sort of my turning point. That's when I decided someday I want to go into television. The route to television was through radio, however, and you couldn't just make that jump.
Sure.
So I read everything, learned about all of the personalities, the news director Harold Baker and people like that, and that was my dream. That was my objective in life, was to graduate from high school, get into the university, get a broadcast degree, come back home, and go to work for Channel 12. And that was my plan. It wasn't necessarily their plan, however.
In the early days of your life as a child, you were introduced to television watching Channel 4.
Absolutely.
Because television was brand new when there was no other TV station. In 1949 they signed on and there was television. Nobody even owned a TV set. Why would they?
Actually, somebody did own a TV set back then, and it was my father. My father was a tinkerer. He owned a radio and TV repair shop, mostly radio and records. And he found in a magazine a kit that you could buy to build a television set. Well, we didn't have a television station at that time, not even Channel 4, but he built this television receiver, and he built the antenna, which was 48 elements of aluminum sticks about this long that we mounted on our garage. And I can remember, I think it was my 8th birthday or 7th or 8th birthday, my father said, invite all of your friends over and we're going to have a party in the backyard. And if the weather is just right, we will be able to watch The Lone Ranger from WWL in New Orleans.
Wow.
And I remember that. We had, out of that half-hour show, I think we were able to see about 10 minutes before it faded away. But it had a big motor on the antenna that rotated it, and my father was constantly adjusting it so that we could see it.
Your household might be the first TV household in Jacksonville.
Well, I think we may have been. The Times-Union at that time, or actually it was the Jacksonville Journal, our afternoon newspaper, did a story on the birthday party, and I think it was their opinion that we might have had the first TV set in town.
So that's how you got oriented toward broadcasting, your father and...
Yes. I was also a ham radio operator when I was 11 years old too, and so I'm one of the first walking geeks that you might have ever met.
So radio job in high school.
Yes.
And then you went away to college, still planning a broadcasting career.
Went to University of Florida, and my aim was to get a BS-BR degree, a broadcasting BS degree in journalism, broadcast journalism. I put myself through college by working in the summers at WPDQ. I continued that relationship. And when I was in the university, when I was back in school in the fall, I commuted back to Jacksonville every Friday night and did a 3-hour show on Friday night on WPDQ, worked Saturday and Sunday afternoon after dinner, headed back to Gainesville.
College of Broadcasting was in the stadium.
Yes, the college radio station, WRUF, which again is another one of those examples of where government actually licensed a radio station, a commercial radio station. WRUF was an NBC affiliate, and I got a job in my freshman year as a as a week morning announcer before I went to class. Eventually became the chief announcer, and with that came the apartment that was associated with the radio station. The chief announcer got free board, but you had to live in the radio station right down the hall in the little apartment, and your responsibility was to sign it on every morning at 5:30, and that was the trade.
Another one of our broadcasting pioneers lived there, Norm Davis.
Norm Davis did. He had the same duty I had, yes.
And it's not a well-known fact, I guess, that students who worked at WRUF would occasionally get to live in the stadium. Now known as the Swamp.
The Swamp, that's right. The sign-on announcer and the sign-off announcer both shared the apartment in the radio station.
So you got your degree at the University of Florida.
Came home ready to go to work at Channel 12. However, they weren't ready for me. I had a very good interview and with Harold Baker, and he said, we don't have an opening just yet, but he said, we'll stay in touch. And I went back then to WPDQ, working for $80 a week, and stayed with them for right up to the point of Hurricane Dora in September of 1964. And when Hurricane Dora rolled through town, I just happened to be on the air at WPDQ. At that time, that radio station was located in we called it the Atlantic Coastline Building. Today it's the CSX building on the 13th floor. And everybody in the building that afternoon got trapped because of the rising water of the St. John's. So the only ones in the building that were left were the two of us in the radio station. One was an engineer and one was myself, and 4 cooks in the Morrison's cafeteria on the floor below. So we went through the storm there at WPDQ and in that building. It, in many ways, turned out to be my audition for Channel 12.
Although Harold Baker was listening.
He was listening, and I made a foolish error on the air. He didn't hear it, but he heard about it, and it was embarrassing. I had been told by a police dispatcher that all of the television stations had gone off the air. They had lost power, that there was only the one radio station, WPDQ, that remained as the main communications method to the community. And I believed the dispatcher, and I put it on the air somewhat proudly. We are your only voice out there during this storm. The TV stations couldn't hold on. They were off the air. About 15 minutes later, Harold Baker called me and said, is this the kind of reporting you would do for me? He said, we are still on the air, and the last I heard, Channel 4 has just come back on the air. And he gave me a pretty stern lecture about accuracy and reporting, a lesson that I think I learned well. He did hire me, however, in the midst of the storm, and the first few stories that I did in television was the post-cleanup of Hurricane Dora.
So the station had been on the air about 7 years at that point.
That's right. That's right.
And their claim to fame was from day one they were in color.
Yes, it was the first television station in the United States, perhaps the first in the world, to be built from the ground up for color. It was designed as a color station, and it went on the air that day, that first day, in color. Everybody else was still monochrome. When I say they were on the air in color, all local programming was in color because the networks did not provide color programming for several years later. So you'd have a local newscast in color with black and white film, and you'd switch to the network, which was all in black and white.
You're watching the Jacksonville History Show. We'll continue with our interview with Howard Kelley after this.